Seduction begins with attention that feels rare. Anti-seduction begins with attention that feels forced. The anti-seducer is not someone who fails to attract. They are someone who actively repels, often without realizing it. Their presence tightens the air. Conversations feel longer than they should. Silence becomes uncomfortable. Escape becomes a quiet priority. Unlike the seducer, who studies the psychology of others, the anti-seducer is trapped inside their own emotional noise. They do not observe. They project. They do not listen. They wait. They do not adapt. They insist. At the root of anti-seduction is insecurity disguised as openness. Anti-seducers often believe they are being honest, expressive, or emotionally available. In truth, they are leaking need. Their inner anxiety spills outward through excessive words, overfamiliarity, compulsive self-disclosure, and relentless presence. What they call being real, others experience as pressure. Human beings are exquisitely sensitive to emotional imbalance. When one person wants too much, too fast, the other instinctively withdraws. This reaction is not moral or logical, it is biological. Attraction requires space. Desire needs room to move. The anti-seducer collapses that space immediately. They talk when silence would create intrigue. They explain when mystery would invite curiosity. They pursue when withdrawal would create pull. Instead of making others feel chosen, they make others feel cornered. The anti-seducer does not understand pacing. They mistake proximity for intimacy and availability for value. They give before being asked, reveal before being trusted, attach before being invited. What they offer feels heavy because it arrives unearned. Most damaging of all, anti-seducers lack self-awareness. They do not register discomfort signals, delayed replies, polite nods, short answers, wandering attention. They push forward as if enthusiasm alone can override resistance. Each ignored cue deepens the other person's aversion. Seduction is a dance of mutual adjustment. Anti-seduction is a monologue, where seducers are alert to shifts in mood and energy. Anti-seducers remain fixed in their own emotional agenda. They repeat stories. They circle back to themselves. They confuse sympathy for connection and attention for affection. Their greatest flaw is not selfishness, it is emotional blindness. They do not realize that attraction is not built through effort but through resonance. Not through volume but through timing. Not through presence alone, but through absence, used intelligently. The anti-seducer fills every gap with themselves. Ironically, many anti-seducers believe they are generous. They offer advice no one asked for. They share feelings no one earned. They give help that creates obligation rather than gratitude. Their generosity feels transactional, even when they insist it is not. People withdraw not because anti-seducers are cruel, but because they are exhausting. Attraction thrives on lightness. Anti-seduction carries weight. To study the anti-seducer is not merely to identify others to avoid. It is to locate these tendencies within yourself. Everyone contains anti-seductive impulses. The difference between the powerful and the powerless lies in awareness. Those who fail at seduction blame the world. Those who master it first eliminate what repels. Before learning how to attract, one must learn how not to repel. Before building desire, one must stop killing it. This is the essential function of the anti-seducer. A mirror that shows you what to cut away. The anti-seducer does not come in a single form. They appear in disguises so common that most people never recognize them as dangerous. These are not villains. They are types, patterns of behavior that quietly poison attraction before it ever has a chance to breathe. Each anti-seducer archetype commits the same crime in a different way. They make the interaction about themselves instead of the emotional experience they are creating. The first and most common type is the clinger. The clinger mistakes intensity for intimacy. They attach too quickly, mirror too eagerly, and escalate emotionally without invitation. Their attention is relentless, not selective. Instead of making someone feel chosen, they make them feel captured. The clinger texts first, texts again, explains the silence, apologizes preemptively, and reassures excessively. Their desire is naked and uncontrolled, and because of that, it loses all power. Desire exposed too early collapses under its own weight. Where the seducer allows attraction to grow organically, the clinger rushes the process, attempting to secure certainty before it exists. The result is predictable. The other person feels responsible for managing the clinger's emotions. Attraction turns into obligation. Interest turns into guilt. Escape becomes the only relief. Next is the talker. The talker overwhelms through words. They believe connection is built by sharing everything: stories, opinions, anxieties, histories, without filter or timing. They dominate conversations, not out of arrogance, but nervousness. Silence frightens them. They fill it compulsively, unaware that silence is often where desire forms. The talker confuses expression with connection. True seduction listens more than it speaks. The talker listens only long enough to prepare their next anecdote. They interrupt subtly, redirect conversations back to themselves, and drain the interaction of mystery. By explaining everything, they leave nothing to imagine. Then there is the pleaser. The pleaser tries to earn attraction through service. They agree with everything. They suppress their own preferences. They anticipate needs that were never expressed. On the surface, they seem kind, attentive, even generous. Beneath it lies fear of rejection, fear of conflict, fear of being unchosen. The pleaser removes tension, but tension is essential. Seduction requires polarity. The pleaser flattens it. By refusing to assert boundaries or desires, they become emotionally invisible. People do not desire what does not resist. Constant accommodation signals low value, not devotion. Closely related is the victim. The victim seduces through suffering or attempts to. They share wounds too early, frame themselves as misunderstood, unlucky, perpetually wronged. They seek sympathy instead of desire, validation instead of attraction. While vulnerability is powerful when timed correctly, premature vulnerability feels manipulative. The victim asks to be rescued, not desired. They burden the listener with emotional labor and create an imbalance from the start. Attraction cannot survive when one person becomes the caretaker of the other's self-worth. Another insidious type is the self-obsessed. This anti-seducer is not always loud. Sometimes they are charming on the surface, but everything bends back toward them: their ambitions, their frustrations, their brilliance, their suffering. Other people exist as mirrors, not participants. They ask questions only to pivot back to themselves. Attention that does not feel mutual feels empty. People withdraw not because the self-obsessed is uninteresting, but because they are incurious. Seduction requires fascination with the inner world of another. Without it, attraction starves. Then there is the oblivious anti-seducer, perhaps the most dangerous because they mean no harm. They cannot read emotional cues. They miss discomfort. They ignore withdrawal signals. They escalate when the other person pulls back. They interpret politeness as interest and patience as permission. Their lack of awareness turns interactions into endurance tests. Seduction is sensitivity sharpened to a blade. Obliviousness blunts it completely. Across all these types runs a single thread: emotional imbalance. The anti-seducer wants more than the moment can support. More reassurance, more response, more certainty, more validation. This excess leaks out in tone, timing, posture, words. Humans sense it instantly and recoil without needing to explain why. Attraction is not logical, it is reactive. This is why anti-seducers are often confused by rejection. They believe they did everything right. They were honest, available, interested, generous. What they cannot see is that they removed the oxygen attraction needs to survive. To root out the anti-seducer within yourself, you must learn restraint. Not suppression, restraint. The discipline of withholding until the moment invites it. The courage to let silence stand. The confidence to allow uncertainty. Before you can seduce, you must first stop chasing. Anti-seductive behavior is rarely intentional. It is not born from malice, but from conditioning. The anti-seducer is shaped over time by fear, insecurity, and misunderstanding of how desire actually works. Most people do not become anti-seducers because they want to repel others. They become so because they are trying too hard to be accepted. At the root of every anti-seducer lies neediness. And neediness is not about wanting someone. It is about needing validation. To feel whole. This need creates distortion. It warps perception. The anti-seducer begins to see every interaction as a test, every silence as rejection, every pause as danger. Instead of remaining present, they become hyper-aware of themselves. Their attention collapses inward. They monitor their performance rather than the emotional current between two people. Seduction, however, demands outward focus. The anti-seducer cannot seduce because they are too busy trying not to fail. Most anti-seducers were conditioned early to equate approval with safety. Praise meant love, disapproval meant loss. As adults, this conditioning resurfaces in social and romantic dynamics. They unconsciously attempt to secure approval immediately, believing that delay equals danger. This is why they over-explain, why they justify, why they rush intimacy, why they apologize excessively. They are negotiating acceptance instead of allowing attraction to develop. Another origin of the anti-seducer is emotional starvation. People who have gone long periods without attention often hoard it. When they finally receive some, they cling, they press, they demand continuity. The moment interest appears, they try to lock it down, fearing it may vanish. But desire is not preserved through force, it is preserved through freedom. The anti-seducer's anxiety poisons the atmosphere. Even when it's spoken, it leaks through micro-behaviors. Quick responses, overeagerness, lack of rhythm, inability to match pace. The other person senses pressure without being able to name it. Pressure kills desire faster than indifference. There is also the anti-seducer born from misguided morality. They believe being nice is seductive. They confuse kindness with attraction, politeness with passion, decency with desire. They assume that by avoiding risk, conflict, or assertiveness, they will be rewarded with affection. But seduction is not a moral transaction. Desire is drawn to confidence, clarity, and self-possession, not submission disguised as virtue. The anti-seducer who prides themselves on being harmless becomes invisible. Safety without intrigue becomes dullness. Then there is fear of rejection, the most powerful engine of anti-seduction. To avoid rejection, the anti-seducer removes everything that might provoke it: opinions, boundaries, unpredictability. They become agreeable, neutral, emotionally flat. They hope that by minimizing themselves, they will not be rejected. What they do not realize is that rejection is often preferable to indifference. The anti-seducer is not rejected loudly, they are slowly forgotten. One of the most destructive traits of the anti-seducer is lack of timing. They say the right things at the wrong moment. They escalate when the energy is low. They retreat when it is high. They reveal vulnerability before trust exists, or attempt dominance before desire forms. Their moves are out of sync because they are not reading the emotional temperature, they are acting from script. Seduction is improvisation, not rehearsal. Another critical flaw is emotional transparency without containment. The anti-seducer believes honesty means exposure. They wear every emotion on their sleeve, leaking insecurity, jealousy, frustration, longing. While authenticity matters, and controlled transparency feels unstable, people are drawn to those who feel emotionally grounded, not emotionally flooded. Containment creates gravity. The anti-seducer also fails to understand absence. They fear distance, not realizing that distance intensifies desire. They fear silence, not realizing silence amplifies imagination. They fear ambiguity, not realizing ambiguity fuels pursuit. By filling every gap, they eliminate mystery. By demanding clarity too early, they extinguish tension. By seeking reassurance constantly, they drain attraction of energy. The cure for anti-seduction is not performance, it is self-sufficiency. The moment someone no longer needs interaction to feel validated, their presence changes. Their words slow, their gestures relax, their attention sharpens. They stop pushing and begin allowing. Seduction begins the moment desperation ends. To unlearn anti-seductive behavior, one must develop tolerance for silence, for uncertainty, for delayed gratification. This tolerance creates power. It restores balance. It allows desire to form naturally instead of being forced. Only when the anti-seducer dissolves does the seducer emerge. The anti-seducer is not merely someone to avoid, they are a mirror. They reveal, often painfully, what happens when self-awareness disappears and desire is replaced by hunger. Their presence teaches through repulsion. Their mistakes instruct through contrast. And in understanding them fully, you gain one of the most powerful advantages in the art of seduction: discernment. Because seduction is not only about attracting, it is about knowing whom not to engage, whom to withdraw from, and which energies erode rather than elevate. The anti-seducer drains attention without replenishing it. Every interaction with them feels heavier after it ends. Conversations linger not as pleasure, but as obligation. They speak endlessly yet say nothing that resonates. They ask questions not to understand, but to secure reassurance. They mistake proximity for intimacy and frequency for connection. Their greatest crime is not insecurity, it is emotional extraction. They take without realizing they are taking. They lean without realizing they are leaning. And because they lack self-awareness, they never correct course. They repeat the same behaviors, convinced that persistence will eventually be rewarded. It never is. People do not pull away from anti-seducers because they are cruel. They pull away because they are exhausted. This exhaustion is subtle. It appears as delayed replies, polite disengagement, fading enthusiasm, excuses, emotional retreat. The anti-seducer senses this withdrawal but misreads it, responding with increased pressure instead of restraint. What could have been salvaged through silence is destroyed through pursuit. This is where their downfall becomes complete. The anti-seducer cannot tolerate ambiguity. They demand answers where none should yet exist. They seek guarantees in a realm governed by feeling. They want certainty before desire has even had time to breathe. But seduction lives in uncertainty. Desire grows in the space between signals. It feeds on anticipation, not confirmation. The anti-seducer collapses this space entirely. They crowd the moment. They overdefine. They suffocate possibility. In doing so, they teach a crucial law. Clarity too early is as fatal as confusion too late. Another defining trait of the anti-seducer is their inability to withhold. They give too much too soon: attention, affection, availability, emotion. While generosity can be seductive, premature abundance removes value. What is given freely without discernment loses impact. What is always available ceases to be desired. Scarcity, when natural, creates gravity. The anti-seducer has no gravity because nothing about them feels chosen. Everything feels automatic. Perhaps the most dangerous aspect of the anti-seducer is that anyone can become one. Under stress, under loneliness, under emotional deprivation, even the most confident individual can slip into anti-seductive behavior when their sense of self collapses inward. This is why the anti-seducer is not an external villain, but an internal warning. When you catch yourself over-explaining, pause. When you feel compelled to chase clarity, stop. When silence feels unbearable, observe it. These are moments when the anti-seducer stirs. To master seduction, you must master self-regulation. You must learn to sit comfortably in uncertainty, to allow interest to rise organically, to resist the urge to fill emotional gaps, to maintain dignity even when desire is strong. The true seducer does not force attraction, they create conditions for it. They listen more than they speak. They observe more than they act. They withdraw strategically, not defensively. Where the anti-seducer seeks relief, the seducer cultivates tension. Where the anti-seducer demands reassurance, the seducer radiates self-possession. And here lies the final lesson. Avoiding anti-seduction is not about adopting tricks, it is about removing excess. Remove neediness. Remove urgency. Remove emotional noise. What remains is presence, calm, authority, attraction without effort. Once you can recognize anti-seducers, instantly in others and in yourself, you gain immunity. You stop wasting energy on draining dynamics. You stop confusing attention with desire. You stop negotiating your worth through performance. You become selective. And selectivity is power. The anti-seducer exists to remind you that seduction is not something you do to others. It is something you allow others to experience in your presence. When that presence is grounded, and hurried, and self-contained, desire follows naturally. Anything else repels.